At 4:15 in the afternoon, Jessica didn't accidentally spill her wine. She deliberately tilted her glass over my 6-year-old son Jacob's watercolor painting, the one he spent 3 days creating as a gift for his grandfather. The red wine soaked the picture of the lake near our parents' cabin, destroying the sky he painted and warping the paper until it was useless. Jessica, sounding half-drunk but confident, said Jacob needed to learn that no one cares about his drawings and that he should toughen up instead of taking up space. She finished her drink, set the glass down on the wet painting, and looked around like she expected everyone to agree. My uncle laughed and called it a $1.50 lesson. My mother gave an uncomfortable chuckle, and my cousin smirked, while Jacob's hard work sat ruined on the table. Jacob just sat there, frozen, staring at his ruined painting with his hands shaking over the table. I didn't shout, rush in, or even breathe at first. I just watched him. His shoulders trembled and his face turned red, but he stayed silent, biting his lip and shrinking into his chair like he wished he could disappear. He wasn't searching for help. He was trying to make himself invisible, hoping the laughter around him would fade if he stayed quiet enough. In that moment, I saw exactly what was happening. He was learning the same survival habit I grew up with, the instinct to stay calm, quiet, and non-threatening just to avoid conflict. He was learning that his pain didn't matter, that humiliation was something to swallow so adults wouldn't feel uncomfortable, that being hurt was something to endure quietly. He was learning to be like me, and that realization hit harder than anything else in the room. The realization hit hard. I wasn't just seeing my son get hurt, I was watching him inherit the same silence and self-blame I'd lived with my whole life. If I didn't stop it now, he'd grow up feeling like he should apologize for existing. I looked at my father, David, sitting at the head of the table, hands tense around his fork and jaw tight with unspoken anger. The whole room felt heavy with years of things no one ever said. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly across the floor and cutting through the laughter. I didn't clean the spill or ask for help. I walked over and stepped between Jessica and Jacob, blocking her view of him with my body. I didn't focus on the ruined painting or the mess. I looked straight at her, and for the first time ever, I didn't feel the need to fix the situation or make it easier for everyone. I just stood there, no excuses, no smoothing things over, finally choosing to break the pattern instead of pass it on. It felt like a final line being crossed, not out of anger but out of clarity. I was done carrying guilt that was never mine. I looked at Jessica and said quietly, "You enjoyed that. You enjoyed watching a 6-year-old make something and then destroying it." She rolled her eyes, refilled her glass, and called me dramatic, saying it was just paper and that she'd done him a favor by teaching him to be useful. The word useful felt sharp in my mouth, and the room went still. Jessica's smirk slipped, my mother gasped, and everyone froze. I wasn't trying to smooth things over anymore. I wasn't the one holding everything together. I was a mother finally standing between her child and someone who meant him harm. I glanced at my father. He still hadn't moved, but his eyes were on me now. Before I could say more, my mother jumped in, not to comfort Jacob, but to panic clean the table, wiping up the wine and calling Jessica clumsy like the mess mattered more than the child. She ignored the ruined painting completely, focusing on the spill instead of the hurt she refused to see. My mother tried to smooth everything over with a forced smile, saying it was an accident and that they could just buy Jacob a coloring book with stickers, begging everyone to have a nice dinner because it was Labor Day and we were family. But in that moment my pity for her disappeared. She wasn't clueless or trapped. She was addicted to pretending everything was fine, protecting the illusion of a perfect family at any cost, as long as she never had to pay it herself. She let the quiet ones carry the shame, the fear, the damage, just to keep Jessica calm, because Jessica was the only one who might set the house on fire, and Jacob's feelings were just collateral. Jessica smirked and doubled down, saying Jacob was too soft and that she was doing him a favor by showing him the real world. That was the breaking point. My father, David, finally stood up, slowly, like something old finally giving out, and walked to the mantel where a wooden sign hung that read "Family is forever," and the room felt like it was holding its breath. He paused for a moment, then faced Susan and said in a low, heavy voice that she had wiped the table but never checked on the boy, choosing to worry about the wood instead, which made Susan freeze with a wine-soaked napkin as she told him to stop exaggerating because she was only trying to keep things calm, but he cut her off and said there was no peace left, only silence, and he was done paying the price for it. Then he looked at his left hand. twisted the gold wedding ring he had worn for 40 years, walked to the sink, rubbed soap onto his finger, and painfully worked the ring off until it slid free, after which he returned to the table, held the ring over the wine soaking into Jacob's painting, dropped it onto the paper where it landed with a dull splash, sending red drops across the white cloth, and declared that he was done keeping her peace and done protecting her, leaving behind a silence so heavy it drained the air from the room as his wife stared at the ring sitting in the wine as if something explosive had just been placed in front of her. Jessica let out a sharp, uneasy laugh and mocked her father by asking if he had lost his mind, calling it ridiculous to talk about divorce over cheap painting, though her eyes kept darting around the room. But David didn't respond to her or look at her mother as he calmly walked to his travel bag, pulled out an old black leather notebook with worn edges, and set it heavily on the table before explaining in a steady, chilling tone that he had spent 40 years as a structural engineer trained to spot cracks before everything falls apart, then opened the book to reveal neat pages of detailed notes and numbers as he reminded Jessica that 3 years earlier she had asked for $5,000 for her so-called rising influencer career, brushing it off while claiming she mostly paid it back, only for David to correct her by saying she hadn't returned anything and that this wasn't about one loan but about how he had begun tracking every expense, every small request for groceries, and every withdrawal for repairs that never actually happened. Every time the joint savings account dropped for so-called emergencies, he said, turning the notebook so Susan and Jessica could see the carefully lined columns of dates and amounts, explaining that he tracked everything and even hired a forensic accountant to find where the money really went, which made Susan choke out a quiet plea for him to stop. But David insisted everyone needed to hear it because the family had been laughing at Sarah and Jacob, calling them weak when they were actually the ones paying the price. Then he looked at me with eyes full of regret and admitted he had let me believe I was less important, that Jessica was special, while he silently watched and counted, before flipping the page to reveal bank transfer receipts taped inside and stating this was not an allowance but a ransom, tracing a red ink entry as he calmly listed dates and sums. $12,000 2 years ago for a fake brand deal and $8,000 last year for medical bills that were never real. He lifted his head and locked eyes with Susan as he revealed that the largest payment happened 3 years earlier on the night of the Labor Day party they skipped because she claimed to be ill, and as Susan shook her head in panic and begged him to protect the family name, David's voice broke with a rage none of us had heard before as he said she hadn't protected the name but a criminal. Then turned the page to show a taped police report instead of a receipt and explained that the $174,000 was not for business or gifts but hush money, causing Jessica's confidence to vanish as fear took over while David calmly told the room that 3 years ago Jessica drove drunk, hit a parked car, then struck a 19-year-old girl walking her dog and fled the scene, making the room spin as memories clicked into place, while Susan collapsed into sobs and David, shaking, said she had taken their retirement savings to pay a lawyer to make it disappear. He said she paid the girl's family to avoid a civil case, paid a repair shop to quietly fix the damaged car, lied by calling it a parking issue, and assured him it was resolved, then slammed the notebook shut with a crack that filled the cabin as he accused her of stealing their future to hide Jessica's crime and allowing her to sit at the table mocking a 6-year-old and destroying his painting because she had been taught that her actions carried no consequences, before turning to a pale, speechless Jessica and telling her she was neither a businesswoman nor an influencer but a liability with her mother as an accomplice, leaving a crushing silence that felt like a family life finally collapsing, until Jessica stood, forced confidence into her voice, dismissed it as an accident, claimed her mother did what any mother would, accused David of jealousy, boasted about her brand and followers, and sneered that she didn't need his money or the old cabin at all. David looked at her with a cold, distant pity, not like a father judging a child but like a professional assessing something already beyond saving, then calmly told Jessica she had nothing as he pulled a folded document from the ledger and placed it beside his discarded wedding ring and the ruined painting, explaining that the cabin was his alone, inherited from his father, with Susan's name nowhere on the deed, before flattening the paper and giving them all 1 hour to leave, including Susan, because he was selling the property the next morning to recover the retirement money she had stolen. And when Susan cried that she had nowhere to go in the pouring rain, David emotionlessly suggested she stay with the daughter she had invested everything in, then turned back to Jessica and revealed that 10 minutes earlier, while she was humiliating his grandson, he had frozen every joint account, reported the transfers as fraud, and triggered a forensic investigation that locked all bank access, credit cards, and the business account she used, causing Jessica to panic as she grabbed her phone and desperately checked her banking app. I watched her fall apart as the color drained from her face and she whispered that the transaction was declined, and in that moment the illusion shattered as I saw my sister, once the bully and golden child, shrink into something small and powerless because without my parents' money feeding her life, her confidence and status vanished instantly, revealing that she was never strong or successful but just a child wearing a costume she didn't pay for. Her power borrowed and now gone, which David said out loud as he calmly told her power was rented and the landlord was shutting it down. Then he opened the front door to the raging storm outside where rain poured and wind tore through the cabin and ordered her out. While she searched the room for help as Uncle Mark avoided her gaze, Susan collapsed into helpless sobs, and finally Jessica looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, realizing she was truly alone as she begged me to tell him he was crazy. She begged me not to let him do this and reminded me she was my sister. But as I looked at the woman who had controlled and humiliated me for 30 years, saw the wine-stained painting, and remembered the silence my son had learned and the silence I was finally breaking, I told her calmly to hurry because traffic would be awful. And 6 months later the light in the new apartment felt completely different as bright white sunlight poured through large windows overlooking the park, the space. Smaller than the old house but filled with peace, free from tension, guilt, and fear. As I sat on the floor watching David kneel beside Jacob on a drop cloth, both of them dusty with sawdust and finally at ease. David patiently showed Jacob how to use a miter box to cut wood for a custom frame, calmly reminding him to measure twice because strong frames protect what matters, and Jacob carefully followed along, proud and focused. While life elsewhere had settled into clarity as Susan moved into a small condo and sent long blaming letters I burned without reading, still demanding emotional payment we no longer owed. And Jessica ended up working at a mall kiosk selling phone cases after the fraud case led to a tax audit, crushing legal fees, and the loss of her car, while we stayed exactly where we were, steady, quiet, and finally safe. She was forced into a tiny studio, facing life without a safety net for the first time in 33 years, and the fall had been brutal, while I watched my son, who no longer flinched or hid under tables, happily making glue and wood messes, laughing when he spilled glue and calmly wiping it up because no one was yelling at him. And in that moment I understood the cost of this struggle. We had to dismantle the family to protect the people, burn the structure to save the foundation, a heavy price. But seeing my father's relaxed shoulders and my son's unburdened smile, I knew it was the best choice I ever made. If you've ever broken a bond to save yourself, type freedom in the comments to remind each other that we made the right decision.